Thanks, Kim, and welcome to everybody who's here. Definitely an exciting topic, and I think we're going to have a fun discussion. And like Kim said, post any comments in the chat, questions that you have. We'll obviously take some time at the end, but those will be relayed to me, and we can touch on some of the questions that come up in line as well. So Kim already kind of introduced who I am, what I do, and we talked a little bit about the topic. This is sort of the obligatory who are we slide. Like mostly I'll just say that I'm blessed to be surrounded by a lot of great people with whom I get to collaborate on a lot of cool things. And this topic is one of my favorites that I definitely think we need to talk about more. Who's Grand Canyon Education? We're an educational services provider. We used to be a part of GCU and those split. Now we of course provide the cybersecurity and technology services for GCU, but we definitely also provide services for a lot of other organizations, partially through our recent acquisition, maybe a couple of years ago, of Orbis Education. So we have a lot of fun. We're definitely a values and principle-based organization. And of course, the normal disclosure, the things I say represent my own opinions and not the opinions of my organization. They're the usual disclosure. So our agenda today is we're going to go down the rabbit hole, first taking a look at machines. Now, a lot of this, obviously, we have a highly technical audience here. Some of this will clearly be review, but it's more to orient us towards the elements of how machines work that are relevant to this topic. We're going to take a look at people and how we work, and a little bit of a foray into cognitive psychology. We're going to take a closer look at machines to understand people, and then we're going to take a look back at people to understand the impact of machines and how our society may evolve. So again, our topic here really is going to expand out, you know, what are the flaws in the programming of our machines? What are the flaws in how we think as people? And then as we interact with technology platforms, how are these things exploited to have the vast amount of misinformation and disinformation that we've seen? Like, why are we so susceptible? You know, misinformation's clearly been around for longer than documented history, but it really is starting to have an impact in ways that I don't think we necessarily saw, with the speed and scale that I think's unprecedented throughout history. So again, the look at machines, I mean, if you're expecting this to be really deep, obviously keeping it really high level, even higher level than our classical OSI model type view. You know, if we look at how our machines, you know, our creations as humanity process information, you know, we've got applications running on lower level software, running on hardware. You know, it's a pretty simple view. So our software is what we're frequently creating and evolving and tailoring as our canvas to paint on to solve any problem, to evolve thought, to create cool new apps. And I think we all have this experience. I had an app idea in a chat yesterday. I was drawing out like napkin drawings, literally on napkins from my spilled coffee yesterday. And those may evolve into white papers and ideas, and applications and software allow us to basically take our ideas and thoughts and actualize them in the real world in a meaningful way. So obviously, that's how we've seen our society explode and grow and evolve in lots of really phenomenal ways. I'm definitely not a techno-dystopian type, but with those great things, I'm not a techno-utopian either. Obviously, as we've seen the past year or two, during the pandemic, our technologies have saved us. Here we are virtual. Hopefully we get to meet again in person soon. But while a lot of us had to be virtual and not travel and not go places for a period of time, our technology allowed us to stay connected with loved ones, to share ideas, to continue our economy. You know, so a lot of really great things have happened with our applications. And then obviously, as we've seen with the colonial oil pipeline, as we've seen with misinformation campaigns, as we've seen with a lot of polarization of society, a lot of foreign interference in our thought and our communications, we obviously see a dark side of our technology as well. So I think it's useful to zoom out and think, like, what is software? Software is just really a series of ideas crafted in a language that our machines can understand to carry out our will. And obviously we get so down the rabbit hole of the details that sometimes we forget to zoom out and think about it that way. I know I do, but we learn languages with a syntax, a grammar that we follow. And it's very similar and has a lot of parallels to human cognition and our own methods of thought. And cognition is really just the process we follow when we learn, when we acquire new knowledge, when we transput inputs from our senses into thoughts that materialize into intuitions that lead to actions. And kind of like software, it allows us to shape our world. But obviously, we've been doing this cognition thing a whole lot longer than we've been doing the software thing. And I think there's many things you could unpack there worthy of their own topic, things like software quality. There's obviously some parallels there that we'll get into in a moment. But we learn about how to program our own machines through human thought. We've obviously mirrored what happens in our own reality into our creations. And if software is really just a set of ideas, would malware just be a set of bad ideas, malicious ideas? So now we begin to look at what's been a 2-decade evolution of digital malicious thought. Clearly, we've had cognitive malicious thought for a long time. We could go back through history to so many misconceptions that have led to wars, that have led to oppression, that have led to lots of bad outcomes. Again, we don't need to rehash all of history. Everybody knows that, but it's pretty fascinating, right? So now we're going to take a look at people. The level set is really just that. It's a level set that we've been through on our own technology, but through a lens of software as ideas. So if we look at people, human information processing has some pros and cons as it relates to synthetic digital information processing. The human mind is highly adaptable. We're great at pattern recognition. I highly recommend Ray Kurzweil's book, How to Create a Mind, and some of his other books. But if we look at the neurophysiology, we have these networks of hierarchical hidden Markov models that string together to give us this amazing fast pattern recognition that's not perfect. It can be flawed, but it's good enough. So we're adapted very, very well to respond to threats to our survival as well. And we'll get into that a little bit further as we go along. But we're prone to biases and errors. And unlike the latest Patch Tuesday, the errors that we have in our cognitive processing seem to be pernicious and a little difficult to fix. Don't get me wrong. Some of the underpinnings of remote desktop and SMB definitely let us know that the things to fix that are root cause level within our operating systems, our network protocols, our communication protocols. Not saying those are easy to fix either by any stretch, but it's a whole nother game when we look at systems that have been with us for so long. And that, we talk about technological debt, biological, neurological debt is a whole nother animal. And a lot of great researchers have done a lot of work over the past several decades to outline that. And we'll take a deeper look at that as we go along. But as Daniel Kahneman recently, well, I guess it was a while ago, wrote in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and his work that earned him a Nobel Prize on biases and heuristics, our brains, our cognitive processing is not very well optimized to the digital world and the threats that we face today. We have this concept of an amygdala hijack, and it's very, very useful when I'm out camping and I see a bear. That happened to me a couple summers ago. There was a bear in camp. I have vasoconstriction. All the blood goes central. I'm ready for fight, for flight, to protect my kids. Luckily, we've moved beyond sharpening spears. I had some better options around to protect myself. Of course, this poor bear just passed through camp, checked out our coolers, and moved on. Realized, oh, all right, they bought the cheap steaks at Fry's. I'm going to go to the next campsite where they shopped at AJ's or Whole Foods. But bottom line, that amygdala hijack is very, very well adapted to that bear threat. It's not really that well adapted to the types of stimuli that we face in a conference room when we're threatened or afraid due to a change in a project scope. And they're certainly not adapted to the scenarios that folks like Chris Hagnaghi have done a phenomenal job outlining in his seminal works on social engineering. You know, clearly we're not adapted to the things that attackers manipulate when they social engineer, whether it's with a phone call or a very, very well-crafted lure in a phishing email. So human information processing, it's phenomenal. Like it or not, we're kind of pretty stuck with it, but it does have drawbacks, and we need to be aware of those drawbacks. Obviously, a lot of folks have done a great job outlining those drawbacks and how they equate to human interaction. We'll touch on that. A lot of folks have done a really great job, like Hagnaghi and others, on how human perception and our limitations can be used with a pretext and a lure to cause people to behave badly as it relates to cyber intrusion. We'll talk about that, but I feel like there's a lot more thought needed and a lot more general awareness we need to elevate on how these things are manipulated within large social platforms and the now technology-oriented world we live in. So, you know, why do we do the things we do? You know, there's been a lot of great thought leadership, you know, going back to the 50s. You had Solomon Asch, who talked about conformity and showed, hey, if you have a group of people who are asked to talk about the length of objects and which object is longer, if you plant 6 out of 7 people and all 6 out of 7 are giving the wrong answer going around a table, about 67% of the time, you can get somebody to go along with it and to actually give the wrong answer through peer pressure and conformity. So clearly that's a flaw. Pavlov has shown, you know, operant conditioning and how you can get a dog to salivate at the sound of a bell. So we talked about that, and obviously conditioning in our own surroundings can affect us as well. And then Leon Festinger did a great job talking about, you know, cognitive dissonance and other social theories, like the idea that, hey, you know, if you're leading me down a path, whether it's in a social engineering scheme over a long period of time, you know, you get somebody to do something a little bit wrong. They justify that in their minds because they feel a dissonance. The justification gets rid of the dissonance, and this moves quickly into anchoring in the world of Amos and Tversky. But now I've got a new anchor. It's okay to interact with this guy Chris, who's calling me with this social engineering lure. He says he's the help desk. He had me help him out once before. It was pretty innocent. You know, when this guy calls back and asks me to help him again, I've already now kind of set a new anchoring point based on a justification based upon dissonance. So again, these are just basically flaws, but we see this play out on social platforms as well. If all my friends believe something and I see that, you know, doom scrolling through my feed or just scrolling through like, oh, Sally believes this and I really like Sally and I really like Joe and I want Sally and Joe to like me. Well, maybe I should like this and share something similar so I fit in more. I'm not the nerd of the group, you know, that social outcast who always goes to technology conferences and skips all the events and birthday parties writing white papers and stuff, right? And, you know, maybe I'm part of some groups that the norms kind of condition me with that compliance, and that conditioning causes me to justify these viewpoints over time to eliminate the dissonance if maybe they stray from my initial view. So, yeah, really to me, you know, I'm a huge fan of the work of Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. You know, God rest Tversky, you know, phenomenal thinker. Wish she would have lived long enough to get the Nobel Prize with Daniel Kahneman, but really groundbreaking work. If there is a social engineering component to what you do, or that's an aspect of what you're defending against, definitely read Thinking Fast and Slow, along with anything that Hagnagi's ever written. But they really help unpack this topic of how pervasive our heuristics and biases are in our thinking. And obviously we have system 1 and system 2 for different levels of information processing, right? Like we have the deep thought that we can go through that cause us to think rationally, but that's not the thought processes we use day to day when we're having to sift through the ton of information coming at us. I have a bunch of servers buzzing in the side. They're making background noise. I don't even hear them. I'm used to them. The dog bark in the background, it's just always there. I don't think about it. You think about the massive trove of information we're sorting through all the time. We need heuristics to sort through it so that what's important stands out. Whether it's that the classical important things that are pretty innate even within our wetware, within our biological equivalent of hardware platforms, like the equivalent of an amygdala, the equivalent of hormone responses in response to stimuli, those things that are more hardwired, onto the heuristics that we learn day to day, like, oh, these 25 phone calls I got today are all sales calls. I ignore them, but whoa, when I see that one, that's our knock. I need to pick up that call. We use these heuristics to sort through the information we need every day, but there's a cost to that in that it causes us to make mistakes. The availability heuristic. If things seem frequently represented in our social media feed, in our blog posts, even within security circles, we will often believe them to be true without doing empirical research. And then if actual data comes in that contradict those cliches, we'll tend to believe the cliche over the empirical data once we have that viewpoint. So that's an availability heuristic of the frequency of the information we see. The saliency of that information tends to overshadow facts and data. This leads to irrational fears, like I am afraid of snakes, spiders. When I was a kid, I was afraid of lightning strikes. But really, what do we die of the most? Heart disease, other diseases, car crashes, right? If we look at the dangers around us versus the things we're afraid of, it's completely irrational, often at a ratio of 30, 40,000 to 1. So as we look at these things, it's not difficult to see how we're irrational. And great authors like Dan O'Reilly have written books about it. Like, I suggest Predictably Irrational, to look through how bad we are innately as humans at looking at data versus actually working our way through truth and verifiable truths versus what's salient, what's available. So if you take the availability heuristic, you're constantly resetting anchoring points. We get into a technical construct we're all pretty familiar with, right? You have positive and negative feedback loops. Well, we can see how it's pretty easy with technology to get locked into, say, a positive feedback loop. And we'll look at that quite a bit more in the future. So I'm not obviously going to go through exhaustively, the work of these many great scientists over many great years, from cognitive dissonance and conformity through the much more advanced work of System 1, System 2 thinking, and all of the great work on heuristics and biases. I only go through that at a very cursory level as a non-cognitive psychologist to simply set the groundwork for all of us that, hey, our human thinking is flawed. We've known this for years within the community. That's why social engineering is so effective. But hey, maybe there's some broader there's some broader implications than just how well we do our security awareness training, what lures we're most concerned about, or how well we protect against social engineering, what's going to make that next pen test engagement successful, If we're on the consulting side, there's more to it than that. One last one that I really think is the icing on the cake for how social platforms really need to be considered when we get into misinformation and disinformation is Dunbar's number. A British anthropologist named Robin Dunbar fairly recently, within the past few decades, the 90s, noticed that, gosh, we know a lot of people, those of us who go to security conferences, we all meet each other, but we can only be close to maybe what would equate to a tribe size, 150, 200 people. That's there's some dispute on exactly where that number is. Some talk that it may be increasing very slowly due to technology, but there's a max number to where we don't feel empathy and connection at a top level. Those are the groups of people we can at least feel commonality with. As a Navy veteran, I feel a natural, immediate commonality with other Navy veterans, maybe a little less with other military veterans. But if I meet somebody who goes to Renaissance festivals, well, they're cool, I've been to one, but maybe it's a lower level connection. So what Dunbar's number gives us is the concept that we're used to dealing with and feeling empathy with like larger subgroups and demographics, but we're really only close to and can keep track of a tribe-sized number of people. And while that's increasing very, very slowly and incrementally. So this number makes us fairly maladapted to deal with social platforms where we have thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. And those types of interactions, those types of interconnections, really when we come back to it, we feel close to a relatively small number of people. So, we ask the question, what's the tribe size of Facebook? What's the tribe size of Instagram? What's the tribe size of the Twitter following that many here probably have? I tend to be Twitter inept. That's the social platform. I always fail at it. I keep it anonymous so I don't get in trouble, but then nobody finds it. So it's pretty funny. But we all have friends with just zillions of Twitter followers. It's really hard to have a tribe size type phenomenon to know that. And then obviously we all have friends, or maybe we've been those people who say something stupid on Twitter, get in trouble, because again, we can relate to how our views will be received within that Dunbar's number group of people. We can even understand how it will be received within, say, a few circles we're connected with, say, cybersecurity. Then it gets taken out of context, and now we have a bit of a crisis. But it also leads to concepts that a lot of people have been doing great advocacy with, like cyberbullying. Once we don't feel that sense of empathy because the people that we're dealing with are outside that tribe size number, we don't necessarily feel the same empathy, that same human connection, which sometimes causes humans, not necessarily innately evil humans, just normal humans, to sometimes be a little rude and mean. And then we can see, looking back through conformity, looking back through cognitive dissonance, looking back through anchoring and then re-anchoring, it's not very hard to see how very, very quickly regular, nice, well-intending people can become really, really mean really quickly on social platforms. And obviously we've seen this end tragically, lots and lots of cases and news stories on people who were cyber bullied, who hurt themselves, who hurt others, who have mental health breakdowns. It really is tragic. And it's just one example of how this begins to work. So those are actually mostly so far touching on examples of how wrong, how badly this can go when we're just trying to interact with good intentions among each other, or when there's cases of very, very precise, pinpointed social engineering to carry out a very specific objective, like, hey, I want to get an intrusion into your systems, or I want a lure to be effective so I can build my botnet that I want to rent out or sell or carry out a particular objective with. But what happens when people are actually aware of these biases, these heuristics, when they're aware of the software applications that run on our cognitive information systems and deliberately try to exploit them? Like, what happens when that's the case? And we begin to enter, or to couch the topic of actual systemic misinformation, disinformation, and true information warfare, like on a scale where we've never seen it before. Obviously, information warfare has been around for a very, very long time. Back to the days of like the Sun Tzu texts talk about information warfare, but it's very, very different now. So, and we had a comment from the audience about Telegram. Yes, definitely. Don't forget Telegram. That's another one. And, I look at the number of apps on my system, that I'm obligated and pulled in to carry along. It's dizzying, right? So many different groups, so far beyond my own personal Dunbar number. So to look at misinformation when it's exploited on our cognitive processing, it's actually useful to understand the amazing thought that many of us, many in this audience probably have even put in and published on and talked about for years about the typical malware infection flow. Like Lockheed has the great cyber kill chain. But at the end of the day, it all starts with vulnerabilities on a system. Sometimes these are easily patched and fixed. Sometimes they're pernicious and systemic and live deep within our operating systems. And it's whack-a-mole, it's patched, but then there's a new iteration of it the next patch Tuesday. But it all starts with a vulnerability. And then malware exploits those vulnerabilities. Again, these are just malicious ideas. In languages, not Spanish or English or Japanese, but in programming languages, often scripting languages, sometimes compiled languages, sometimes hands-on keyboard manipulating a protocol or a method of communication. But bad ideas, malicious ideas, are used to exploit vulnerabilities on systems. And then naturally, what do you want to do? You want to escalate privileges. Well, great, I can get this piece of software to run, but I want complete control. I want a reverse shell, a reverse web shell. I want persistence. I want to laterally propagate to control the entire enterprise. So without going too deep, because it's not our purpose here, that's the typical malware infection flow, compromise flow that we all know and love, know and loathe. Our day-to-day lives are all about it. So malware is just bad ideas, as we talked about. But can there be bad ideas that exploit our own cognitive processing, cognitive malware? Are there cognitive vulnerabilities that are exploited on human information systems that we need to take into account? Like, what would cognitive malware look like? Like, what if it's not compiled in C? What if it's not an executable? What if it is? What if it's not scripting in a man-in-the-browser attack? That gives you the ability to inject into a session, to steal credentials, cookies. But what if the credentials being stolen are trust in our interactions, mind space? What if the remote code execution is an idea that follows a cognitive flow? So just like that malware information flow, vulnerabilities exist on our systems. Fear, hate, anger. I should have put a Yoda meme here. But our own fear, our own hate, our own anger, and those who don't think they have any fear, any hate, any anger, in my own anecdotal experience, are usually the ones wrestling with it the most. Most of us with some self-awareness are constantly wrestling with our own biases that we're even aware of. And then there's obviously, to go back to Rumsfeldism, the unknown unknowns. We all have those that we don't even know we have. So malicious ideas exploit these vulnerabilities. If somebody of a particular viewpoint, nationality, perspective political persuasion, beat me up on the playground when I was 5, and I associate that. And then somebody who I associate with a similar set of ideas then maybe bullied me in high school, that type of thing. Well, then fast forward, I have a viewpoint, maybe a software application running called social interaction, maybe with some vulnerable libraries called, hate, fear, anger, bias. I don't like people in polo shirts because I think people who dress up are pretentious. So I only trust people in HackerCon t-shirts, right? So to make it funny. But what happens is once somebody gets remote code execution on a host, they escalate privileges. Well, and they begin to try to establish persistence. That's mind share and control. Well, how do you establish, like, what's the concept of a wormable idea? A meme. There have been a lot of great TED Talks and discussions on the power of memes. Memes being a viral idea, something salient, something that connects with the demographic at a level that you get right away, and they can be very powerful, very good. There's much good cognitive software in the world, but there's also bad cognitive software in the world, just by nature, the nature of being human, the nature of our platforms. But what's really scary is they're in an information warfare where there's nation states trying to drive social outcomes, trying to seed division, doubt, hate, anger, infighting, these types of things. Take people who would have just been like, hey, we agree on 90%, we disagree on 10%, let's just go get a beer and joke about it, to fighting each other harshly. These types of outcomes are driven because the C2 mechanism, the command and control mechanism of cognitive malware, is social media, whether that's Telegram, whether that's Facebook. And then of course, what we've seen recently is as there's been better stewardship and governance on conventional platforms, it's moved to less conventional platforms where everybody's like, hey, we're ditching Facebook and going to 4chan or whatever, right? There's this drive as a C2 mechanism gets burned. Once there's a hook, obviously it's easy to give a command like, hey, this C2 group is about to get shut down, shift to the alternate, right? You send out one last command and go dark. So there's a lot of parallels that we can begin to see here. So now we take a closer look back at people to understand the impact of this on how we interact with machines. So traditionally, the reach of bad ideas is limited. Cognitive malware, while there may not have been an epistem where that could be a thing back in the day, there definitely was an idea of bad ideas. Like we all pick on anecdotal examples like the Salem witch trials. You could go to the Dark Ages. Michel Foucault has done a lot of great writing about the panoptica and how our cubicle structure could have subtle tie-ins, and how we orient our workspaces have tie-ins to the penal society, and how the panoptica of prison systems were set up in like Middle Ages and older times, and how that even goes back to mass incarceration due to fear that was transposed from people being afraid of the plague to when the plague was gone, they needed something to do with these social structures. So they naturally just moved on to other things. At least that's what Foucault postulates. But traditionally, the reach of bad ideas is limited. They spread so slowly, they're isolated. Well, now you can have a cute puppy YouTube video that's around the world and has 100 million views in days or hours or minutes. So the speed of memes, the speed at which an idea can propagate, we've seen the cyber equivalent with WannaCry, with NotPetya. We've seen nation state actors weaponize wormable vulnerabilities, bad ideas in the form of code, to spread like wildfire across all systems vulnerable. Well, we've also, on the heels of that, seen weaponization of misinformation in the form of ideas that exploit cognitive biases. Obviously, as researchers from Festinger to Tversky and Kahneman have well oriented, to be able to get remote code execution on human hosts in predictable, reliable ways across demographics with C2 over social media, and then invoking actions, calling upon people to do things. Again, the relevance of which groups, which nation states, which biases is unimportant and misses the point. So obviously, yeah, we could pick on and call out different demographics, groups, and I think that we have to be careful, because getting into that is just playing into, I think, some of the same infighting that these efforts are seeking to cultivate. But instead, I think we need to zoom out a little bit and look at, if there's wormable malware spreading over social media, exploiting cognitive biases, like, what does this look like? How does this happen? And what can we do to effectively inoculate ourselves? And most importantly, we're all here because we've spent many years working very hard to rapidly evolve to stop malware from propagating in digital systems. And billions of dollars of research across many verticals, thousands of startups, probably at this point, millions of articles and blogs and different podcasts and presentations on how to do this. Well, let's reverse it. People have been identifying the problem for years. Are there things that we can do that we learned from cybersecurity that could be applied back to responsible use of social media? And can the cybersecurity community give back to the cognitive sciences that we've all gained so much from? And if we have a kill chain, the kill chain for cognitive malware would be a legitimate trigger event, a carefully constructed narrative. Then, of course, there's misinformation campaigns that are delivered. That's kind of that weaponized phase. And then there's supporting information continuously custom tailored. Like, it's not enough to hook me once. You have to maintain persistence by continuously escalating privileges, by maintaining that communication. And with human beings, it's probably a little bit more complicated in some ways than it is with bots and information systems. And then, the outcome is polarized, galvanized populations that then can be used for whatever political agenda. Again, if you agree with the political agenda of one day, you might disagree with the one the next day. So again, the importance isn't which agenda, it's, hey, it's probably not very good for society to have this manipulated. So, what can we do? How can we protect ourselves? So one is, has been going on for a long time. People have been doing various types of Mythbuster type exercises. And again, there's the verify the verifier, which ones do you trust? There's a chicken and egg problem, but the bottom line is orienting towards promoting things that involve facts, data, even some degree of screening is very good. I know we want open content, but there should be a disproportional trust level of things that have had to go through some validation versus things that had no validation. They're being propagated by something with no credibility. Again, the cognitive psychology construct is the notion of social trust. Well, social trust is breaking down in this new paradigm where things are distant, where we're exceeding our tribe size, where we're exceeding our Dunbar number. Again, I don't have an answer here, but more postulating the topics, the conversations, the discussion on, what does that social trust look like? What is the appropriate form of myth busting? How do we combat this? And then what does threat intelligence and information sharing look like for cognitive malware? What are the cognitive firewalls in AV? What are the cognitive equivalents of patching and vulnerability management? Well, the first patch that I think many hope to put out there is the notion that this is a thing. That one, I think something Kahneman and others have been trying to get out there for years is, hey, look, our cognitive processing is not perfect. It's systemically flawed, and we shouldn't just trust our gut all the time. Our gut is broken. It can't be absolutely trusted. The fact that people are trying to launch misinformation campaigns. And then the second is, like, what's the equivalent of sysmon or EDR on ourselves? Something I've been trying to do with myself is if I get spun up, if I get activated, if I get upset, like the antivirus, the sysmon would be, hey, why am I all of a sudden upset? Why is cortisol pulsing through my veins? Why is my blood pressure elevated? Why is my heart beating rapidly? Hopefully it's something cool, fun, and exciting, like a roller coaster ride. But if I'm not on a roller coaster, did I just get hooked by something? Was it something rational? Was it something irrational? Whether it's being open to change in the workplace, or whether it's like, whoa, this news story, this thing really got me hooked. Is it because I should be hooked? Or am I being manipulated? Is this credible? Should I be trusting this? Maybe that's the first patching and antivirus we can employ against cognitive malware. So again, this is not something, again, that there's a lot of answers for, and parts of the problem may be intractable for a while, but I believe the first step is awareness and having that discussion from a broader perspective on how this impacts society. And then obviously, this is useful. Information warfare and cyber warfare are very closely interconnected, and one is likely to follow the other, which is likely to lead to feedback loops, right? And we've definitely seen nation state actors use kinetic warfare, cyber war, and misinformation in tandem. And there are nation states that are very good at that. So I feel like if we're looking from a cyber war perspective, we also need to look from a broader perspective of how information systems are being weaponized against humans, as well as how information systems are being weaponized in a more direct fashion as we're typically concerned about. So with that, I appreciate the time, the interest, the good feedback and chat, and I'd love to open it up for any thoughts or questions if I didn't talk for too long, if we still have time.
Well, that was very insightful, Mike. Thank you so much. Most of our, I think it was such a unique presentation. It was mainly comments. I had Al say the subject is very interesting and very, very timely. I did have someone earlier that referred to, Robert said, "See Being Wrong, Adventures in the Margin of Error" by Kathleen Schultz, an excellent read topic like anchoring. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm writing that down. I'll track that one down. I'm always looking for good new things to study on this topic.
And there was lots of my audience is being pretty quiet, but great topic from San Diego. Doesn't look like I'm having a ton of topics. Thank you for the presentation. Love this presentation. Again, such a timely presentation. How do you feel like when you talk about nation state actors and just things that have happened within the last, just in the last couple of months? If someone said, you think things are going to get worse? I mean, we kind of all are afraid it is. What would your comment be on the things that have just happened with some of these nation state bad actors?
I mean, it's wild. It's like we're living out a bad 80s novel, right? It's the things that we've seen come to pass just in the past 24 to 48 months. I think while many of us have been predicting, yeah, this is going to get bad, these things will happen, the past 5 years has been where the predictions of decades have materialized now at the forefront of public consciousness as we look at cyber topics like ransomware as a service, this complex affiliate model, the muddy waters of nation state activity, but then safe harbor to cybercrime. Where do these lines blur? Where's national culpability? So yeah, I think it's going to get really, really crazy. I'm glad that there is now some greater mainstream awareness culminating over the past few months, even the past few weeks, even, but I definitely think we need to get ahead of some of these topics because, the things that we're seeing play out were the things of fiction years ago.
Well, and that is, somebody just said, great plot for a movie. And then someone did say, what is your next progression on exploring this topic?
It's a great question. I'm open to feedback from the audience, or private chat me on this platform if you would like to collaborate, if you have ideas I haven't thought of. I think it might be useful at some point to consider a joint cognitive psychology, cybersecurity type white paper that brings both audiences together, because I think, again, I give infinite props to Chris Hagnaghi and others, but I feel like often we're operating in two silos between the two, and maybe there's an opportunity for convergence on this topic. That's probably what's next.
Danny said, are countries not able to fight back collectively against nation states? That's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough because, and again, I'm getting flashbacks to talking at the front of a college classroom years ago about like all these hypothetical things that could happen one day. And one of the topics we used to talk about cyber war a decade ago, all of us probably, is at what point are you worried about cyber war spilling into a kinetic war? And while we have kind of multiple micro cold wars brewing in these cyber activities, one of the concerns is where do you draw the hard lines? In the book Sandworm that came out a while ago, it was pointed out that we've missed some opportunities because some red lines have been crossed over the past 5 years and they've been ignored. Well, now we're at the point, how much can we push back? What can we do? And when do we hit the points where we risk a runaway conflict that starts cyber, starts information, but then quickly spirals out of control?
So I don't want to paraphrase this. I don't want to be wrong on this. I've been up in the mountains in Colorado for the last week, and I just got home 2 days ago. So I just turned the news on for the first time last night, and I did hear the CEO from Colonial Pipeline is talking now, and it just sounds like they weren't prepared. I mean, they're just admitting that they weren't prepared. So how many other situations? I mean, do you think this is a wake-up call when you have the CEO come out and say that? And it's it didn't sound like he was hiding anything. They just weren't prepared.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's levels of it, right? So yeah, I actually commend their transparency, their openness, and I think they did a really good job of both engaging with the cyber community to get better, admitting their mistakes, and talking honestly. So I really applaud Colonial on that. That's what we all need to do. None of us are perfect. We all need to get better. But then we see things like SolarWinds, where, okay, did SolarWinds make mistakes? Yes. But at the point SolarWinds as a trusted, well-vetted product was inside of the many organizations compromised due to that, it's a really, really tough problem. And hiring another bazillion people to just do more vendor reviews in isolation at each organization probably isn't the solution either, right? So there's something broader, something more holistic needs to be done. And you end up with the problem of externalities, again, to go back to another cognitive psychology notion of when you have an organization that can impact the GDP of a major nation, that there's no amount they can spend on cybersecurity out of their profits in a year that will come close to mitigating the risk of bringing down our critical infrastructure. So how do we manage the externality of what society thinks a colonial should be spending on cyber with, gasoline hoarding and panics versus what their gross revenue says that a regular, reasonable, prudent accountant says they should spend on cyber. So there's a bit of a broader scale dilemma we need to address there.
And that could be a whole nother hour and a whole nother topic. And I do have a show on Voice America. It's a nationally syndicated radio show, and I'd love to have you as my guest on that. I do that every week because we would have some great things to talk about. So thank you so much, Mike Manrod, and he is the Chief Security Officer from Grand Canyon Education. Thank you so much for spending this past hour. For all of our viewers, if you have any more comments, or as Mike asked, please connect with him. You can connect with him on this platform or on LinkedIn. That's how I connected with him. So we always appreciate when the CISOs take time to spend an hour with us, because we know you guys are forever busy and things aren't easy out there. So thank you for everything you do, and thank you for spending an hour with us. So thanks, Mike. And go ahead.
Thank you, Kim, and thanks to the audience for all the participation. It's been a great experience.
Great. We can't wait to see you in person. Hopefully we'll be in Phoenix sooner than later. For everyone else, we're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break. This is a great time to go visit our sponsors. There, you can go up to the social lounge and you could see Mike up there if you have any questions for him. And we will be back, and we have another presentation, and then we will go into our panel session. And I don't have my notes in front of me, so we're going to turn it over to Red Canary. We're going to have Chris Abbey. He's an incident handling manager, speaking on the 5 critical pillars of the SOC of the future. But we'll take a 15-minute break and we'll be back for that, and then we'll go into our CISO panel. Thanks, everyone.